to reflect back upon the lives of two fine men, title holders, who held titles in the year 1989, 25 years, not from exactly today, but pretty close. And I think both of them have represented their titles and the community generally in a way that is rather remarkable. And I think that's why they've been asked to be here. Not just because it's 25 years later, but because of who they are and what they have done in our scene. I'm going to say up front that we do need to end this right at 5 or a little bit before. So if we're approaching the 5 o'clock mark as we come near the end of the session, and I'm cutting short signals or anything like that, that's why. Because the entire organization needs this session to be done on time or a little bit before. Right, Roy? Yay. That's right. Okay, good. So, with that said, I would like to introduce Guy Baldwin. Guy has a resume an arm long and then some. He is here ostensibly as International Mr. Leather.
Different arms.
1989, but like both of these men, has done a tremendous, and we'll talk more about that as we progress. Also, Brian Dawson, International Mr. Drummer, 1989. So the way we're going to start today is I'm going to ask each gentleman to just say a few words to start off, sort of opening statements. Doesn't have to be anything formal or fancy, just so that you can hear them all speak initially. And then I will do a kind of interview Q&A a la James Lipton in Actors Studio with these two fine gentlemen, and we'll find out a little bit about their lives, how they feel about the scene, the title system, you name it, we're going to try and cover it. Although a lot of it will be centered upon the title system, because that is the system both of these gentlemen came from. So, with that said, I would like to ask Brian if you would kick off first and give us a few words to open us up. So
okay. The whole thing was kind of interesting when they asked if we would come, and one of the questions was to me is like, does anybody even know who we are anyway? Because most of you are younger than my children in the audience, so does anybody remember? But somebody does, so thank you for showing up. My path is probably a little unique for some, but I was married for 17 years and finally decided that it was really more men than women that I liked, and so I finally came out as a gay man when I was 38, just about 38. So I started very, very late, and then almost within a year, I used to go to Floyd's Country Western Bar in Long Beach, and they had a leather contest. So I showed up in my turquoise Speedos and was good to go. Anyway, I won the contest, and so some nice people pulled me aside and go, you better get your shit together if you're going to do anything with this. So I ran for Mr. LA Leather, and I won that. By that time, I had either been given, earned, or bought enough leather to make it to IML, and so that was 1988. And then 1989, I sort of repackaged myself into what I was really more comfortable with, and that I'm really more of a doer than a talker. So the drummer title seemed to fit me better. So that... No, I'm not trying to get into trouble with that comment, but truth be known that this man can talk most of you and I, under the table. So rather than compete with a renowned author and speaker, I just figured I'd go the other way around the bar because there's going to be a whole lot less competition.
Yeah, but you left an important piece out. In 1988, he placed third at IML. You left that out. So he started at IML. I don't want you guys not to know that. He may not want you to know it, but I want you to know it.
Yes.
It doesn't.
Here. No, it does matter. We're recording this.
Anyway,
It's on.
Is it on?
Yes.
Is it on? No, you took third place at IML in '88, and that wasn't good enough for you, was it? So you repackaged yourself.
I repackaged myself. The most memorable thing, I think, other than forgetting part of my speech at IML, was the jockstrap portion when I bent over and my jockstrap snapped. So I think that most people remembered me because I'm the guy that walked off stage like this. So that was kind of the highlight of the whole thing.
Good. Thank you. Guy.
Well, how I came to go after the IML title is kind of odd. Mike Pereira, who won in '88, was a friend of mine. And one morning in November, I got a phone call from Mike. And he said, Guy, do you do dream interpretation? He knew that I was a psychotherapist. And I said, well, when I have to, I can do that. Not very. He said, well, I need help. I had a nightmare last night. I said, what was a nightmare, Mike? And he said, well, I went to sleep, and during the dream, I dreamt that I went to IML in May, and there was nobody to give the title to. So they made me keep it for another year, and that was a nightmare. And so when I woke up, I told my lover, Steve, about the nightmare, and he said, well, gee, Mike, you've been traveling around the country judging contests and so forth. Have you not seen anyone around the country at the local level who you think would be able to carry the title? And Mike said, no, I haven't. And then Steve said to Mike, he said, well, do you not know anyone who you would feel comfortable handing the title off to? Mike thought for a minute, and he said, well, I think I would feel comfortable handing the title off to Guy Baldwin. And Steve said, well, then you should call Guy up and tell him to enter. And so I got a phone call, and I said, Mike, I said, I've never thought about being IML. He said, well, I need you to think about it now because I don't want I don't want the wrong person to get the title next year. And he said, gee, Guy, do you know anybody who you think could do a better job than you? And I started thinking about it, and I thought, hell, no, I really don't. Plus which, I had always encouraged my patients to do volunteer service if they had a chance. You have to remember that 1989 was in the middle of what I've come to call the grim time. And I'd always encouraged my clients to try to do volunteer service. And, you know, they were AIDS buddies and did all kinds of volunteer stuff. And I thought, well, this is volunteer work and takes advantage of my skill set, so maybe I should do that. So I was part of the National Leather Association, and I flew up to Seattle to enter the NLA title. The National Leather Association had a title contest then. They don't now, but they did then, because I thought I'd be in a better position in Chicago if I arrived in Chicago with a national title rather than a local one. So I pretty handily won in Seattle and arrived in Chicago to compete for IML. That's how I came to that task.
How many people in the audience were in the theater when IML won? Anyone? When Guy won IML?
You were? Really? You were at the Vic Theater that night? I'll be damned. I'll be damned.
And who, if anyone, was in the theater when Brian won International Mr. Drummer?
I was his judge, so I was there.
I was in the contest with Brian.
Oh, you were?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I love it. Now, even more importantly, who jerked off to their pictures in Drummer Magazine? There you go. One of the things that I talked to these gentlemen about prior was if they recalled anything from their speeches when they competed. And I think, Brian, in your case, you don't have your speech, but Guy does have some of his speech. And I thought it would be interesting for him to say that speech now that he gave 25 years ago and then reflect on it. Got it?
There is a reason that my family does not know me any better than they do, nor do they care to. And the reason is that I'm a Leatherman, and they know that. And they understand that it is through the lens of leather sex that the universe reveals itself to me. And that's why they don't want to know me any better than they do. But fortunately, I have another family, a family of choice, a group of people who know, love, trust, and accept me for precisely who I am at all times. In these days when we are under attack from so many different directions, we need each other in a family kind of way. If you don't have your own leather family, go out and make one. Make it happen. Welcome to Chicago. Play safe. Hope you have a good time here this weekend. And the judges liked it.
They did.
They still would. Still works today.
So, Guy and Brian, this is going to be a question for both of you. It's 25 years later. We still have an incredibly robust title system. How do you see the contestants, not the contest, the contestants of today as different from when you competed? And Brian, why don't you?
Okay, I knew that question was coming, and I tried my darndest to see a significant difference. But I'm an architect, so I'm going to use an analogy. I've been in housing since 1977, and I go to conference after conference after conference to see the newest, latest, greatest iteration, and it's all sort of the same thing. And not that that's bad, but it evolves so smallly and slightly. And I think that the same, for me at least, is, because I don't judge every year, but I've judged enough along the way. And I think that we ask the same questions that we used to ask, 25 years ago. We still want to find the person that cares. We're looking for the person that has potential, that has heart. They don't have to have been, seasoned, but we want to see somebody that's got potential. And so I think that we still look for that same kind of person. So I see less difference than more difference. That's just my take on it.
Okay. Guy?
That's interesting. I have a different
I know you would.
point of view. I do see a difference. Big difference. The title system, in my occasionally humble opinion, well, it's true, has become a gateway into the leather world in a way that it never was when we competed. The men who stood on the IML stage with me were players. Any one of them could have stood up and explained to an outsider what BDSM leather sexuality is and done a fine job. Nowadays, a lot of the youngsters who come into the title system come in because they're trying to find a way into a larger community that they sense they belong to, but really don't fully understand. But they're motivated and they are eager, but not nearly as well prepared to actually do the job as I think we were 25 years ago. Because, I mean, think about the people who were on that stage. Wes Decker was on that stage. Dustin Logan was on that stage. Mike Pereira, Pete Morrison, all of those guys were seasoned players, and they were old hands at radical sexuality. These days, I don't know how many of these freshly minted title holders really are fluent with the issues in our world, and that's a little bit troubling to me, because I don't know, for better or for worse, I see IML as an important job. I do not see it as a leadership job. I see it as a representation job, and that's not the same thing. Being entitled, having a title does not automatically confer leadership skills on anybody. If they had leadership skills before, then they will have them during the course of their title. But if they didn't have them, then they're not going to have, the title's not going to magically confer leadership skills on anyone. And that's a difference too, so blah, blah, blah.
The comment that I would make to that is you just described me. I said I'd been out for 2.5, 3 years. I showed up in turquoise bikini, so I clearly didn't get it. But you and several other people said this guy that's got potential. He probably doesn't know what the fuck he's doing, but he has potential. So he taught me how to use a flogger, and he taught me how to use a single tail, and they stood behind me and they believed I'd be. And 25 years later, I'm still trying to do the right thing. So you guys knew something, that I had potential, and because of that, I look for the same thing when I see guys today that just believe beyond imagination that they want to make a difference. So it's not because I was seasoned. I mean, probably everybody on that stage knew more about leather than I did, but I'm a real quick learner. So
yeah, you were a diamond.
You are that.
You were a diamond in the rough, honey. You polished up really good, really fast. Well, I know the reason I know that is that I was Brian's judge at the International Drummer Competition. And because I knew that the other judges knew that Brian and I were acquainted, I was a little worried that if Brian won, there would be charges of favoritism. So as his judge, I felt an obligation to really put him through his paces in front of the other judges. And I was harder on him than any of the other judges were. Mostly to cover my own ass, you understand. But by then, you were indeed a very quick study. So the judges the previous year at IML got third place for you just right, I think. Yeah. And a year later, you were the dude.
Out of curiosity, how many people in the audience are title holders? Just raise your hand.
Ever. Wow. Ever.
Ever, yes, meaning
ever.
Whether you're current or ever. Okay. And many of you I know are current. We're about a month out from IML. Some of you in the audience are competing. I know that. So what advice would you give for today's contestants? IML or otherwise?
Does anybody know the name Susie Shepherd? Okay. Susie Shepherd was International Ms. Leather, was it 88 or 89? 89. So our paths would cross. All of our paths tended to cross that year as we flew about. And I was still scared to death to show up in a new place. And it wasn't Omaha, but it's somewhere in the Midwest. Our flight had hit a wind shear, and they made us land at another airport, and then finally brought us to the correct airport. And by that time, I was an absolute mess. So Susie Shepherd came up behind me and started giving me a neck massage. And I said, Susie, I said, I don't know what I'm doing. And she said, yes, you do. She said, just believe in yourself. She said, you've got everything you need right now. She said, just speak from your heart and be honest with people. Don't bullshit people, and you'll be fine. So that's not my advice. That was Susie Shepard's advice to me. So I would offer that as a possible thing for the contestants coming out.
Believe in yourself. Okay.
I have a couple of pieces of advice, as you might guess.
Shocked.
I've judged like 92 contests over the years, and I wrote a book about it, so I'm opinionated about these things. One piece of advice is if you don't want the job, tell the judges that. Step out of the way for the people who really want the job. Don't compete for something you don't want. And the reason I give that piece of advice is that there have been years when people who didn't want the job won the title. At least 4 times that I can think of. No names will be mentioned. But if you don't, no years will be mentioned either. What was that? Tacky, correct? Yeah, no names, no years. But if you don't want the job, just cop to that. That's cool. I understand that some percentage of the current title holder crop that will be competing isn't, necessarily want the job. They are obligated to go to Chicago by virtue of the fact that they want a local title, and so they have to honor the needs of their sponsors, and so they show up in Chicago and do the thing. Sometimes they do really well, and didn't really want the job. In any case, so there's piece of advice 1. If you don't want the job, tell the judges that. Piece of advice number 2 is do your homework. See what you can learn about the people who you think you might want to represent, because we're a complicated bunch. And the range of variation in our subculture is huge, and bigger now than it was when I held title. We didn't know what furries were. Didn't exist. The football uniform scene, sports gear scene, was just starting to stick its head out of the tall grass when Brian and I held title. So the range of human variation in radical sexuality has exploded in the last 25 years. So do your homework to the extent that you can, because the judges can ask you anything. I mean, they have the latitude to ask you anything. I also think if you really want the job, prepare for it. I did. Take it, it's a serious thing. The thing I've been a little bit concerned about with many recent winners is I don't perceive that they have a lot of gravitas. Up until 1984, the IML title was a beauty contest, pretty much. But in 1985, Patrick Toner won. He was Mr. San Francisco Leather. And he was the first guy that really thought about harnessing the prestige of the IML title to AIDS fundraising. And he did it in a big way in California. By the time Michael Pereira won in 1988, Michael was taking that same show on the road, if you will. And I took that same idea and really expanded it as fully as I could. And we raised hundreds of thousands of dollars because we needed to. Nowadays, the urgency to do that sort of thing has changed because HIV has become a more chronic disease than it was at the time, because our friends aren't dropping around us like flies anymore. We were scared and we were urgent, and there was an emergency going on now. And that sense of emergency doesn't exist as intensely today as it did. And so it's beginning to feel more like a beauty contest again. It's really been an interesting arc to follow, and that's a little concerning to me. That's not a popular point of view, I know.
Unpopular points of view are just fine. Brian, Guy and I... Whoa. Is that you? No. Guy and I met you about the same time you ran for IML, and I think the community was pretty supportive of you back then. Do you think the community is just as supportive of its title holders today Yes? No?
I think I'm just going to complete everything we talk about is going to be different. The LA Boys of Leather, there are several LA organizations that stand behind title holders and nurture and guide them and help them understand, and that's now. So when I was coming along, I had these gentlemen and some others to guide me. So it was different, but not different. And that it's probably more organized, at least in LA, and that's my reference because I don't understand the rest of the country. But I wouldn't be surprised if there aren't other similar groups in other cities that, the Band of Brothers, they're past title holders, and they all get behind them, and they nurture them and help them out. And from the outside looking in, because I'm not as active anymore, it's just remarkable what I see happening today. So I don't see this huge difference. Maybe along the way it ebbed and flowed stuff, but right now they seem to be pretty organized, and hopefully they're nurturing and guiding the contestants in a way that prepares them for making a difference.
So we're 25 years later. I think it's inevitable the title likely affected your life. But in what significant ways do you think winning your titles, your respective titles, impacted your life personally, and also within the scene as a whole?
Personally, it's, I'm not, I don't try and hide. I've got 2 kids and an ex-wife, and they know everything but where the key to the dungeon is. So there's very little that's kept behind. So I have not had to lead a second life or hide anything behind. I've been very, very fortunate that who I am and my partner, and if he's collared, that everybody completely gets it. And so I think that I've gotten a huge amount of support that way. The second part of the question was?
Just personally, how did it impact you, but also in the scene as a whole?
How did I affect the scene, or how did the scene affect me?
Affect you in relation to the scene as a whole.
Okay. All right, the thing that affected me is it gave me a real sense of confidence in who I am. Because I think a lot of us grow up going, am I really that fucked up and weird, and am I the only guy doing this? And back then, I felt like I was the only guy doing that. And now you just Google it and find out who else is 20 feet away, or what's the other one? Grinder, like who's 20 feet away from you that's doing the same stuff. So it's completely different. But I believe in myself. I have a sense of confidence. I think that has bled over into my professional life. I believe in myself, and I'm flawed, and I know it, and I forget shit, and I know it. But I feel really good about who I am, and I know that drummer in the leather community and all of that stuff and all of those years has made me who I am.
Guy?
Well, it ruined my sex life. No, it absolutely did. It ruined my sex life for about 5 years, which is funny because one of the many reasons that I wanted the title was I thought, gee, I really want to find the right husband for myself. And if I'm out there on the road, I have the chance to sort of scour the country looking for Mr. Right. Naive, I know, because it really did ruin my sex life for about 5 years. Because the only people who really wanted to spend time with me were drunks and starfuckers, mostly. And that was really confusing for me. So it had a huge, complicated effect on my private life that wasn't a lot of fun, I must say. Is that it?
It can be it.
Okay.
Do either of you have any regrets about running for the title?
Well, it was viciously expensive. Oh my God, it was expensive.
How expensive?
Oh, it was about $22K expensive 25 years ago.
In $1989.
And one of the reasons was that was me that did that, because I wanted to to take the title to a more professional level. When people had me stay in their homes when I was on the road, I sent them a gift. I sent them a thank you note. I sent them a Christmas card at Christmas. I wanted to do it in as classy a way as I could, because I knew that that had never been done. None of my predecessors had really tried to take it. I had a signature photograph of myself made that Jim Weigler took. He was one of the famous drummer photographers, and I had a a headshot photo kind of thing, and I would take the photos with me on the road, and I'd sign them, and I must have signed 500 or 600 of those things. They were all over the country, and so I really wanted to step it up, a lot more. I got hundreds of letters. This is before the internet, you have to understand. Well, just at the very beginning of the internet, and every letter that I got, I answered. And I have all those letters. They're in my archive, and with all of the responses that I made. I really took it very seriously, and that was not cheap.
Any regrets?
I guess my regret, because I was not out as a Leatherman, nor did I write, or any of the things that you gentlemen did. I was an architect, and I was a partner in a firm. And thank God there was no real sincere internet back then, and now I'm retired, so I don't care what the fuck you say about me now. But back then, it was pretty scary, and had the internet been as well developed as it was, it could have been much worse. So I do have a little bit of a regret. I did what I wanted to do, I did what I think I needed to do, but somebody got a hold of my fax number one day, and somebody sent a nude picture through the fax machine to my office. You can imagine how devastating that is when you're a principal in a firm. So yeah, there was some shit that happened that I really, really, really regret.
Well, you did porn.
Yeah, but there are also nude pictures of me in Drummer Magazine, even if I hadn't done porn.
Yes, there were, and there were no nude pictures of me were ever out there, because I had a professional license, and I wasn't willing to risk that the California Board of Behavioral Science Examiners would come after my livelihood. So I never did porn. I wanted to. I had opportunities. I said no. There's a fold-out. There's a, what do you call it? When the centerfold, that's it. Centerfold of me in Drummer 130, I can't remember. And it, I got pants on, naked from the waist up, but I got pants on. So I didn't have that risk. And he was great in porn, by the way. He was really good. Some of which was in our dungeon, as a matter of fact.
The very first one that we shot was in your dungeon.
Race and I,
we had a great dungeon.
We had a pretty spectacular.
Except that it wasn't air conditioned, and it was 120 something degrees the day we shot in there, and so they'd run the fans until they go to do the shoot, and then they turn the fans off.
Yeah, like you hate to sweat.
So Guy and I would be sitting by the pool, and every so often he would come out dripping wet with the model, and we'd just watch. And then they'd go back in, and we'd wait till it got hot again, and then the door would open. It was fun.
It was great fun.
I did want to make one comment. I'm not as stupid as I may appear. I called the California Board of Architectural Examiners, and I said, if I were to do this, would that in any way jeopardize my license? And they went, no. So at least I had the smart to check on that.
Interesting. I did the same thing. I didn't know that you had done that. I went around to a bunch of my colleagues before I competed for IML, and I said, I'm thinking about running for this leather title. Can you think of any professional reason I should not do that? And one of the colleagues I asked about that actually had been sitting on the board when I was licensed, and her signature was on my license. And I went to her, Teresa de Crescenza, And I said, Teresa, am I going to be in is professional lightning going to strike me if I do this? And she said, well, what are you going to be wearing? Well, it was an intelligent question. And I said, well, you know, during the jockstrap portion of this thing, I'm going to be wearing a leather jockstrap codpiece. I'm going to have high boots on. I'm going to be wearing gloves. And I'm going to be carrying a bunch of leather bondage straps. And she said, in other words, you're going to be wearing more than you'd have on at a beach? And I said, yeah. She said, don't worry. So we both did due diligence. Right. I didn't know that you'd done that. Yeah. Well, you know, because I was afraid that somebody would come after me. But lightning has never struck me. Professional lightning has never struck.
One of the things you alluded to earlier in your statement about contests is that back then you felt that a lot of the people who entered the contest were players, seasoned players, had been around a long time. And you had a somewhat different experience, but do you still think it's a prerequisite for contestants to be overtly kinky in that way, or is simply donning leather enough?
You're looking at me.
I'm looking at both of you,
okay.
actually.
No, you have got to be twisted. I mean, there's just no way that you belong here if you're not. That's why we're here. Short version of the story. At 8 years old, before you reach puberty, my almost nightly dream was that I would kidnap men and take them to an island where I kept them and I tortured them. I'm 8 years old, and I had no sexual reference. I didn't get a boner. I didn't jack off. I didn't have a wet dream. There was no sex with these men ever. All I ever did was torture them and keep them on the island. So, I mean, it's your DNA. It's just you can ignore it for as long as you want, but it's going to raise its wonderful head at some point.
Guy?
My professional opinion on the matter is that being kinky is an orientation. That's independent of being gay or straight or bisexual or anything else. It's an orientation. For those for whom it is an orientation. Our world is also populated by what I call erotic tourists who sort of roll through our world. They read a couple of books. They can learn how to do bondage, or they learn how to do a flogging scene, and they roll through our world to try it on for size. And it either works for them or it doesn't work for them, but eventually they lose some passionate connection to the activities and they will drift on. And that muddies the water for the rest of us to some extent. But, you know, we all know how to swim in muddy water. It doesn't necessarily feel as fun as swimming in, you know, with fish of our own kind, as it were, but you can still have a good time with those people. But I absolutely think that people have to be twisted in at least one significant way, and feel passionate about it. As far as the title system goes, when you're out there on the road doing the job, you're alone. I've often referred to IML as the velvet meat grinder. And its task, the job of the judges, in my view, is to find the person who can survive the job and not bring any dishonor upon the title. Anybody who wins IML has one and only one official obligation, and that is to come back the following year and judge the contest. That's it. That's all the IML organization expects of you. The unspoken expectation is that you will do nothing during your title year to bring dishonor upon the title. Now, there have been a few close calls. But by and large, that hasn't really happened yet. None of us has been arrested, you know, gotten into that kind of trouble. But you have to do the job out there by yourself. And when you're at an event and some newbie walks up to you and says, gee, you know, what's this leather stuff all about? You have a social moral obligation to be able to give them some kind of an answer that's supportive and educational and facilitative. And if you're not prepared to do that, then what's your motive for wanting the job? What are you here for? You know, the downside of the big time title holding is that by the end of your year, you've learned how to do it, and then you're done. Well, if they're around, yeah, you can teach the next guy if he's interested in paying attention to you.
So if it's important that a title holder be kinky in some way, tell us a little bit about yourselves. What are some of your kinks? What are some of the things that really turn your crank? Brian.
How much time have we got left?
Tell us about your new island.
Well, years ago I had a 1,400 square foot dungeon near Disneyland. So
it was Disneyland.